Yeah, Charlene, that was that was lovely. It's one of my favorite poems. The real title of this is "To Be of Use in a Bureaucracy," but I came up with that about 10 seconds ago, so that's why it's not in the program order. Sarah reached out to me and said that the environment. Oh, sorry. My name is Jordi Comas. I use he and him pronouns. And I am somewhere between middle-aged and elderly. I'm 17 times 3 years old, which I like because it's 2 prime numbers. Yeah, I pass as a white, straight man, but the Census Bureau thinks that I'm Hispanic because of my father. And I'm wearing a black hat that says "Standing with Love" from the UUA. And a black T-shirt that you can't see the whole thing, but it's worth looking at because it says "Disregard the Constabulary," and it has Frog and Toad, who, if you don't know Frog and Toad, are 2 most excellent, I would say, life guides. And I will figure this out. Give you half a sec here. Okay, that's better. So Sarah asked me to talk about a job I started in May. It's a bit Game of Thrones-esque if you watch that. My official title is I am a coordinator for the Office of Environmental Justice for Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection, serving the North Central region. So Merriam-Webster defines environmental justice. Just kidding. How dare you come to us with this weak bullshit policy, was what Zulene Mayfield told me and a bunch of my colleagues who work in the Office of Environmental Justice a few weeks ago. And I want you to paint the scene in your mind. We were in a community center in Chester, PA. Has anyone been to Chester? Chester is across the, I can't claim to know a lot about it. It's across the river from Philadelphia in Delaware County. Yet another example of the baffling, confusing geography of Pennsylvania. Chester is not in Chester County, it's in Delaware County. When I'm in charge of everything, there will no longer be townships with the same name as the boroughs they're next to. Drives me crazy. So we're in a community center, bright lights, nice building. There's about 30 people, many of them from Circle, SIRQL. I'll come back to what that is. Zulene is one of the leaders of Circle. She's an African-American woman, probably about my age or a little older. There's about 6 or 8 students from Swarthmore who have brought signs, protest signs that say things like environmental racism is bad or something much more clever. It's a real cross mix of people from Chester. There's 2 just badass nuns who are full of smiles for people and full of righteous indignation about the issues we're there to talk about. And why are we there? We're there because as part of my job, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is doing an update of its policy. And that's going on right now. Through the end of November, we are formally asking for comments from any kind of stakeholder or constituent in Pennsylvania about this update to the policy. And what the policy does is it says where there's an environmental justice concern or issue or area, this policy will apply. Well, you can see logically, if you say the policy applies in some places, you got to be able to say where. So there's a data visualization tool called the Pen EnviroScreen tool that goes hand in hand with this, like a horse in a buggy, like a pierogi in a pat of butter. Just send pen reference. And Zulene is speaking after she let about 10 or 11 people go before her. And what's my role there? It's not actually my meeting. It's one of my colleagues. Her name's Amani. She's one of those people who's delightfully, she could be 22 or 38, I can't tell. African-American woman herself. We've just met in the last several months. I like her a lot, respect her. And it's really her meeting, right? And I'm in the support role. Really, I didn't need to be there, but I wanted to come. I'd heard about Chester. And I've got my finger on the space bar for the timer. And so it was actually a lot like this, people in the room, there's a timer on the screen, and it's counting down from 3 minutes to 0, because we're the state, we're the government. We have to treat people the same. So everybody gets 3 minutes to share their comments, their testimony. There's a court stenographer, so we get an exact record. There's an ASL interpreter, a Spanish interpreter. So my finger's on the timer because, we're supposed to keep it to 3 minutes. Why? Well, because we're supposed to be fair to everyone. If we let people go too long, like legit, maybe we would be there for hours and hours. It's one of those things, it's a bit church tent revival. Once one person talks, somebody else thinks, I wasn't going to, but now I have something to say. And a lot of people in our society don't get a lot of chances to say exactly what they think to either the actual people who have power, or in this case, the people who are there to listen and be the face of the people who have power. And it gets to 0. And I think we all thought that rather than us say like, okay, your time's up, the timer would be there, and it would be like a prompt, like a kind of natural prompt for Zulene or for whoever. But Zulene is talking about the history of Chester and how 30 years ago, she started with some other people, Chester Citizens for, I don't remember the exact acronym, but make it be Circle. Chester Engaged Citizens for Environmental Concerns and Quality of Life, something like that. Because there was a heck of a lot of pollution in Chester. From industrial concerns, from municipal landfills, from incinerators that are burning municipal waste. And the timer goes past 0 and starts counting up, right? And I look over at Imani, who's very focused on Zulene, and she knows Zulene because she's been doing the kind of work we do in this area. And the reason she and I even have a job in the Office of Environmental Justice is because 30 years ago, Zulene and Circle and some other people sued DEP. That's not a good sign. You want to relight it? If you're online, the chalice just went out. I mean, I've been told I'm full of hot air, but. Oh, it needs oil. Where are the Maccabees when you need them? Come on, that is gold. I think we should, this is important though, like I'm glad, should I pause or should I keep going while they fix the oil? Keep going. So Zulene and Circle and a man named Jerry Bartow, who worked for the Public Interest Law Center, which is based in Philadelphia, which tangent into my life was the same group that sued the Commonwealth over gerrymandering about 6 years ago, and I was one of the 18 plaintiffs. So a lot of good stuff that's happened in Pennsylvania has the PILC behind them. So Jerry was a man a little bit like Bush, I think, Van Bush, and not like me. I've never worked in really an industry or science, but had been a civil engineer who worked designing supermarkets through the 50s and 60s. And his second career was as an environmental lawyer, in part because he had seen how often either companies don't fulfill what they're supposed to, or cut corners, or simply just ignore environmental laws, and how government regulators who are tasked to be that protective force or entity don't do their job. So Jerry and Zulene, and I'm sure other people, were talking about what to do about Chester. And so she has a reason to want to talk for more than 3 minutes. So is it fair to stop her at 3 minutes? Sure. Is it just? As the white guy in the room, I really didn't want to be the person as the timekeeper. It's not a role I wanted. I have some friends in Williamsport who are African American, and we were talking about where to canvass once, and I said, well, what do you call the neighborhood where more of the black people live? And they said, it's called Browntown. And I was like, please don't make me say that. Can we go to the first slide? So you may or may not know that in the Pennsylvania Constitution, we have Article 1, Section 27. I'm just curious, how many people? It's fine if you, 1, awesome, 2, okay, hands higher, I really want to see, 3 people. I'm not shaming you at all. Who would know? Who reads? I don't read the Pennsylvania Constitution nightly. It's been in the paper. So one of the reasons that Jerry and Zulene had a case to make and that she wanted to talk for more than 3 minutes was because Article 1, Section 27 was passed in 1971. And it says, the people have a right to, I should have this memorized, clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. Pennsylvania's public natural resources are the common property of the people, including generations yet to come. Oh, I'm trying to read it for the people online, but they can read it, right? And as trustee of these resources, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all people. Now, there's a really great local tie into this. Does anybody know who's considered to be the main author of this? Franklin Curry. Carl, you're always a ringer. Franklin Curry was a state senator who was born in Sunbury. Yeah, you knew him too? And I haven't met him, I just know a little bit about him. But this amendment, to pass an amendment in Pennsylvania is hard compared to other states. You have to get it through 2 sessions of the legislature, and you have to get people to vote on it. And this was at the heyday of a time in American history and American environmental history when we were really, for the first time, I think, confronting a lot of the longstanding issues with pollution from our industrial economy. So this was passed in 71. Some 15 to 20 years later, now we're back to the 90s, Jerry Barlow and Zulene Mayfield and others realized this says that all Pennsylvanians have this right. And yet, if you combine that with the body of law about civil rights, their argument was in Chester, where a company wanted to build something that would pollute, I honestly don't remember the details, for DEP to allow that permit would essentially be a violation of civil rights because more pollution generating sites would violate this right in a discriminatory way because Chester was majority Black. Where was I in this period? Picture a younger Jordi, thinner, with a machete on a horse in the tropical forests of Costa Rica. And this poor horse, the people that I was living with in a homestay would joke that Amarillo, yellow, had 6 legs, 4 of his own and 2 of mine, because I was very large and that environment's not good for horses. And so I was doing a study abroad program where I'd been dispatched to a part of Costa Rica, if you can picture it, out near the Atlantic, down near the Panamanian border, because there was an anthropologist there who wanted to know, how is it that people who lived in Buena Vista and another place called Huautzi, how were they thinking about a potential coal mine that a large company wanted to build? So he sent me out to do interviews, and these 2 communities were very different in the context of Costa Rican society. Buena Vista were basically farmers who had left one part of Costa Rica, they were displaced, and they came here because land rights were kind of ambiguous, and so they could set up farms, cut down the forest, grow beans, have a few cows, make some cash. And Huautzi, spelled U-A-T-S-I, is a Bribri, which word Bribri is a group of indigenous peoples in Costa Rica who, unlike most of the indigenous peoples in Costa Rica, I mean, they basically just killed everybody who came ever through the 17th, 18th, and 19th, and early 20th century. So that by that point, they caught up with the idea of having protected lands. So 2 very different communities, literally Sunbury, Northumberland distance. And then that was interesting to me. And so the next year, as a senior at a small college in Minnesota, I decided to do another research project because on an island in the Mississippi, a place called Prairie Island, was a Lakota reservation and a nuclear power plant. And the nuclear power plant, run by a utility called Northern States Power, wanted to store spent fuel rods in these large pieces of concrete called, and sometimes the companies just fail on the marketing. They call them casks, which is awfully close to casket. Why was the nuclear power plant on an island in the Mississippi next to a Native American reservation? I don't know. You need water. You know, was it an accident? It was next to the Lakota reservation? Probably not. Now they had a casino and money and lawyers. So in May, when Fernando Trevino called me and he said, hey, I'm looking for somebody to be this environmental justice coordinator, he had no idea that I had spent 30 years before, while Zulene was fighting for Chester, learning about what we called then environmental racism. Why would he? It's not a thing I really put on my resume. It was just undergraduate work, although it was pretty intense. But you know, he had heard about me as somebody who does work in rural areas, and he said, do you know anything about environmental racism or environmental justice? And I said, oh, Fernando, I do know a thing or two. And we're going to pause there for the break because it's clear that there is a Saint serendipity, and she was having a role in my life. So part 2 to come.
Here we are. The offering is a sacrament of the free church. We gather each week in this space to find healing and courage, hope and solace. Here we are nurtured, here we are challenged, here we are called to be the very best versions of ourselves that we can muster. There are very real costs to operating mission-based organization. Do not make things we do not make things that can be sold. We do not produce concrete results that can be weighed and measured and judged to have value. Our business is that of changing lives, and in doing so, changing the world. What price can be put on peace found in a hymn? Who can measure what it feels like to be comforted in grief? How would we assess the relative worth of finding a community that celebrates you as a whole, imperfect self? Our relationship with each other and with this church is not transactional. We do not put money in a machine that dispenses serenity and enlightenment. We show up and find a place that helps us build the strength we need to change the world into a better, more loving, more just place. This congregation sustains us with its ministry. Let us sustain it with our gifts. Today's offering will now be gratefully received. May it be joyfully given.
Okay, I tried to leave you on something like a cliffhanger. I don't know if that quite works for sermons. Yeah, Chris, could you go back to the Article 1, Section 27 slide? The Article 1 section, the first one that I had in. Awesome. And maybe now the next one. So, my finger's on the space bar to stop the timer. My brain's on the mental, hand on the space bar. Should I intervene? I'm looking at Amani. She's trying hard not to make eye contact with me. I'm like thumb texting, like, I'm not going to stop her, are you? Just pause there, hold that in your mind for a moment. I told Fernando yes, right? Saint Serendipity had come full circle. He, of course, was doing the kind of thing that I do, which was he really wanted to offer the job to me, but he asked me if I knew anybody, hoping I would go, well, what about me? So if somebody who says they're an organizer ever tries this with you, if I come up to you, I'm like, hey, Bill, my friend, do you know somebody who would do X, Y, and Z? I'm probably have you in mind. Little secret, probably not much of a secret. When Sarah and I first started talking about this sermon, she said a really wonderful thing about how for her, getting to work in our church is living out her values. And I think she thought I would say, and so do I, but I'm not sure that that's true. So that's why Van Bush is a really interesting person. You know, I went in eyes wide open that part of my job is reaching into the bureaucracy, and part of it's outreach into the community. And thinking back just in this moment, you know, Zulene Mayfield back in Chester spent 30 years fighting for her community, and that's her lived reality. And I studied environmental racism, which became environmental justice. And so because of things in my life and paths I've taken and gifts that were given to me, I'm kind of uniquely situated probably to always be an ally, an insider, outsider. I can code switch with bureaucrats and Republicans and men and other people on behalf of other people. And that's real work. It's to be of use. So going back to, so, you know, how can I be of use? I didn't stop Zulene. And I have a big appetite for risk. And if somebody wanted to yell at me in bureaucracy that we didn't follow the rules, fine. You know who you got when you hired me, right? Like, I understand the role of the bureaucracy and of regulations, but I also understand where the edges are fuzzy and where to push. So that is part of being of use of me, is to find those spaces. What happened since that lawsuit? It went to the Supreme Court of the United States. This is the lawsuit between Chester that said basically, it is against our civil rights to permit another facility in Chester. And the Supreme Court in 1998, so 25 years ago, took a big breath and was going to rule on a really important issue. As a society, are we going to say that it's a question of not just equality, but equity or justice, that you cannot put another facility in Chester? And they said, moot. Because DEP denied the permit that was the original permit that had triggered the lawsuit, right? Somebody wanted to build something and they just, in the interim, they just denied it. So short-term win for Zulene and Circle and the people there. And DEP went on to deny several other permits. Now, they could probably say there were good reasons to, but did the political pressure that they had built affect DEP? I wasn't there, but seems a reasonable conclusion to draw. So here we are 25 years later, and Pennsylvania and the United States have still not answered that question. If you live in an area that has the most impacts from pollution and you are among what we would identify as the most vulnerable people, race, class, health reasons, it's still a question of a kind of classic equality. All are the same, right? There's no higher threshold to build in those areas. And so that's where we are. That's why 25 years later, 30 years later, Zilleen was looking at me and the other people and saying, what are you doing? I still live in Chester. Chris, can you go to the, oh no, let's leave it here for a sec. And so, you know, we've gone from environmental racism to environmental justice. There's been a shift in concepts. So if you want no pollution in Chester, that feels like a pretty small step. On the other hand, I would say that's important, right? It's not always just race. Many areas of rural PA that are very white have the same fundamental combination of environmental impacts and pollution and more vulnerable populations. Yeah, and we're not going to do that. Go to the next one. Awesome. So this new policy basically says, and this is a lot of my job is to enact this policy, says when an area is an EJ area, there will be enhanced public participation. And this is a map of what were the environmental justice areas in the policy that was in place from 2004 until now, basically. So DEP was sued, the lawsuit was declared moot. DEP said, we ought to look at this. They created an Office of Environmental Justice. That Office of Environmental Justice said, okay, well, we need to know where are environmental justice areas and what to do. And what they came up with was these areas. And it was only defined by class and race. Only places that were above 20% of the population were in poverty, 30% were racial, people of color, non-white minority, or both. So, you know, nothing actually environmental, which is a bit of a hole. And then it would do enhanced public participation. That was the phrase. And the new policy keeps that, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some other things that are, you know, being of use and what the new policy does, and then come back to the enhanced public participation. But for a minute, you know, I guess for me and maybe for Zilleen, I haven't had a chance to ask her, it's like, really, this is all we've got to show? You know, if we sort of look at the rough metrics of social progress that a lot of us look at, you know, Friends was on in the 90s. I never, ever would have thought we'd see so much progress on equality and liberation for LGBTQ people, right? And for environmental justice, like we updated the definition. So it's hard to know. But some other things, I mean, part of the reality is I work for a regulatory agency that is somewhere between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And we've had either GOP or divided government, and this is not meant to be a partisan comment, it's just a reality, it's not part of their platform since then. So for the people within DEP who want to do the good work and be of use, the most they can do is push a policy. It can never, you know, substitute for a law, which was one of Zulleen's complaints. She was like, there's too many loopholes, and she's right. She doesn't know that those are loopholes for me too, to drive things through. So some of the other things that the policy does is, actually you can go to the next slide, Chris. So this is what environmental justice looks like from a data sense. And I know that that's hard to see, but we've gone from this binary, is it or isn't it, to a new tool that takes 32 factors. 19 of them are about the environment, 13 are about people. And it does a waving my hands if you're online, smushes it all together and comes up with a number from 0 to 99, which represents a percentile. So the 20% of places that are the darkest blue are the ones that have the most environmental justice concerns. And in those areas with this new policy, you know, we've updated what it means. We still have enhanced public participation. Probably the biggest concrete, meaningful step forward, if you want to look at the cumulative impacts, is now anybody, whether you're permitted now, going forward, or in the past, if you operate a facility, and that's always going to be a company or a municipality that has a waterworks or a sewer thing, right? Like I'm seeing Jen Partika does not have an industrial site of her own, you know, that's at the scale that DP is going to be looking at it. So we always say applicant, which is always funny to me because really it's companies most of the time and a few times municipalities, or it could be another part of government, right? Like a state park or whatever, but it's not y'all individually. If you have a permit, which is really a covenant between you and the rest of us that you'll operate within the bounds that you said you would, if you violate it, and it's in an EJ area, now when we do compliance, that can come into effect. That's the kind of thing that people would be like, well, what do you mean? Why isn't it written it down? It's not written down because it's hidden in the bureaucracy, not hidden. It's buried in the bureaucracy because in a way, to do our jobs well, we can't have a rule book that's 18,000 pages long that explains what to do in every single situation. You have to train people, trust them, and put them in positions to use their judgment. But it does mean it could be a factor. And so if we wanted to say the fine should be higher here, or you have to take longer before you can go back into operation, or you have to do more to reduce odors or to reduce outflow or whatever, those are tools in the hands of the regulators. So that's a real thing. The policy also for the first time says that climate change and environmental justice are linked, which again is just words, but that's a framework for people like me to do more, because historically environmental justice was very, very localized. This site, this place, this community. We all live in an environmental justice climate, right? And so it's a way to wed sort of literally global concerns and global policy with the very localized parts of environmental justice. It literally says that I get to be proactive. What does that mean? I get to make it up. But it means instead of just being the office of, sorry, there used to be injustice in the past, what can we do about it? Now we can be more of the office of trying to create some justice, is the way I put it. That's my timer. And the last thing, which probably only I'm really excited about as a policy nerd, is I sort of mentioned the policy was created in 2004 and it's kind of frozen. So the new policy says, okay, every few years you have to revisit the policy and the tool that's underneath, the thing that made this, so that it can never be like the victim of kind of internal bureaucratic politics or just stasis or inertia. So, you know, have we said that that cumulative impacts matter and there should be a higher standard? No. Would that pass in the legislatures we've had in Pennsylvania for the last 30 years? No, probably not. So to be of use for me means to do the most I can with that tool in those spaces, and I'm fine with that. I was interested in listening to Van Bush talk about the information machine he had and sort of thinking about information as a mechanical thing. And I will never, ever have a video like that about my accomplishments because they're not there. But I do think I have a different view of knowledge information, which is it's much more organic and much more complex. And I don't mean organic like raised on a farm free range. I mean that the rules that we have in place to try and deal with what we mean by pollution the environment are always going to be complicated. Any one of my colleagues who has to look at a permit for mining or for air quality or for anything else, it's never as clear cut as a set of rules that they just mindlessly apply, because the nature of the projects, the nature of the environment we live in, the nature of what's going to happen, there's always complexity from those sets of interactions. So I'm out of time. I had a few other things to say, but I will stay after and literally do a Q&A about the details of the policy, about other things if you have them. I encourage everyone through November 30th, if you just Google environmental justice EP, it'll take you to the place about how to leave comments. It's not an easy thing to explain with words. It's easier if you just look at it, or I can send you that information. And the last thought I'll leave you with is, you know, to me, to be of use as somebody who works in the bureaucracy in an imperfect world means to be always kind to people and ruthless to systems. I mean, they put me, Ted. It's okay. All right, closing words. Our closing words are from Michelle Collins. I just read these, right? Okay. Changes abound around us, within us, between us, in our communities, our neighborhoods, and our beloved faith communities. Changes abound. May we each find the balance point we need as we move through our ever-changing world, the balance between the old and the new, between the known and the unknown, I suppose between the none and the unknown, sorry, between the familiar and the perhaps bold and risky possibilities that may be there waiting. Now we extinguish the chalice. Can you do that, Ted? Oh, here it is. This is what you need. Extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. I believe that Dee had to go perform somewhere else, so there will be a silent postlude in your head now. Okay, and I think you have announcements.